He stayed calm as they humiliated him, mocked him, and destroyed his car. But when they saw his badge, their careers flashed before their eyes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street. Judge Malcolm Bennett adjusted his rearview mirror, his expression calm and composed. He wasn't in his usual polished black robe today, just a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, and dark slacks. His car, a sleek black sedan, wasn't flashy, but it carried an air of understated authority. He had just wrapped up a long day at the courthouse, delivering a verdict on a high-profile corruption case. Now, he was on his way home, but a phone call from his clerk had forced him to pull over. He parked near a quiet intersection, reaching for his phone to respond. Just as he was about to speak, the distant wail of a police siren broke the silence. In his peripheral vision, he noticed a patrol car approaching fast. The vehicle slowed, then stopped right behind him. Two officers stepped out, both white, both exuding the cocky confidence of men who never expected to be questioned. Officer Grant, tall with a square jaw and mirrored sunglasses, smirked as he approached the car. His partner, Officer Miller, shorter but stocky, tapped his baton against his palm as if itching for trouble. They exchanged a glance before striding toward the driver's side window. Bennett remained calm, lowering the window as Officer Grant leaned in. "You got a reason for stopping here?" Grant's voice was sharp, laced with the kind of authority that didn't expect to be challenged. Bennett met his gaze evenly. "Just taking a call." Grant let out a small, derisive chuckle. "Yeah? In this neighborhood? Step out of the car." There was no reason to comply, no legal basis for this demand. But Bennett had seen this play out too many times before. He knew the game. He also knew he had already won. Still, he didn't move. "Is there a problem, officer?" Miller stepped closer, resting a hand on the baton at his hip. "Yeah, there is. You're parked suspiciously. This is a residential area. People don't just stop here." The absurdity of the statement almost made Bennett laugh, but he held his composure. "I wasn't aware stopping legally on the side of the road was a crime." Grant's smirk twitched. "You're being difficult. Step out." Bennett sighed, unbuckling his seatbelt. He wasn't afraid, far from it. But he knew these officers weren't looking for a conversation. They were looking for control. He pushed open the door and stepped onto the pavement, standing tall but relaxed. Miller circled the car, eyeing it with exaggerated scrutiny. "Nice ride. Doesn't seem like the kind of car you'd be driving." "And what kind of car is that?" Bennett's voice was smooth, unreadable. Miller shrugged. "Something about it just doesn't fit." It was the unspoken message that lingered in the air. A black man in a nice car, parked in a quiet neighborhood? Must be trouble. Grant walked around to the front of the vehicle, running a hand over the hood, before suddenly slamming his baton against it with a dull thud. "Damn, this paint job is nice. Shame if something happened to it." Bennett's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened just slightly. A flicker of something unspoken passed through them, something that, for the first time, made Grant hesitate. Just then, a woman across the street glanced over, momentarily pausing in her evening walk. Her brow furrowed, as if sensing something wasn't right. But then, just as quickly, she turned away, deciding it wasn't her business. Bennett caught the moment. He had seen it 1,000 times before. The hesitation of bystanders, the way injustice was often met with silent avoidance. Miller knocked against the side mirror, making it shake. "Yeah, real nice car. What do you do anyway?" Bennett let the silence stretch before finally speaking. "I uphold the law." Grant scoffed. "That so?" "Well, let's see some ID." Bennett moved slowly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out his wallet, flicking it open just enough to retrieve his driver's license. But the badge that could end this entire charade in an instant, remained unseen. Not yet. Officer Grant snatched the license from Judge Bennett's hand, barely glancing at it before letting out a low chuckle. His fingers tapped against the plastic card as he exchanged a look with Officer Miller. Malcolm Bennett, Grant read aloud, exaggerating the syllables as if they were foreign. Got an address here from the other side of town. What brings you here, Malcolm? There was no mistaking the condescension in his tone. Bennett remained composed. Like I said, I was taking a call. Grant smirked, flipping the license between his fingers before casually tossing it onto the hood of the car. Yeah, well, I don't like the way you're parked, blocking traffic. Bennett glanced at the empty road. Not a single car had passed in the last 5 minutes. Miller stepped closer, his hand resting on his baton again. You got drugs in the car, Malcolm? Weapons? Bennett exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of this moment. He knew where this was going. He had seen it before, in courtrooms, in reports, in the tearful testimonies of men who had not been as lucky as he was. But luck had nothing to do with it. I have nothing illegal in my vehicle, he said evenly. Miller's grin widened. Then you won't mind if we check? Bennett's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Without probable cause, without my consent, that would be illegal. Grant let out a short, humorless laugh. Illegal? That's a funny word coming from you. See, what we say is probable cause. He gestured vaguely at the car. Becomes probable cause. Now, you gonna pop the trunk, or do we have to make things difficult? Bennett didn't move. The silence stretched between them, growing thick, charged. Grant sighed, shaking his head as if disappointed. Then, without warning, he slammed his baton down against the hood again, this time with real force. The sound echoed through the empty street. Bennett didn't flinch, but across the street, the woman walking her dog stopped again. This time she lingered, her expression uneasy. Miller took it a step further. He stepped around to the side of the car, dragging his gloved fingers across the pristine paint, before curling his fist and pounding against the side mirror. The glass wobbled, but held. Bennett's fingers twitched at his side. A muscle in his jaw tightened. Miller grinned. What? No reaction? Most guys would be screaming by now. Bennett's voice was dangerously quiet. I don't react to children throwing tantrums. Grant's smirk vanished. The air shifted. For the first time, something flashed behind his sunglasses. Something uncertain. But Miller wasn't done. He stepped back, as if admiring his own handiwork, then suddenly reared back and kicked the car door with enough force to leave a dent. The crack of metal against his boot sent a jolt through the air. And then, Bennett moved, not in anger, not in fear, but with deliberate, controlled purpose. He reached into the car, slow and unbothered, retrieving a black leather portfolio from the passenger seat. The officers tensed, their hands drifting toward their holsters. But Bennett simply unzipped the folder and let a single item slip onto the hood. A badge. Not a police badge. A federal badge. The golden insignia gleamed under the fading sunlight, bold, undeniable, absolute. Grant's breath hitched. Miller froze mid-smirk, his fingers twitching at his sides. Bennett met their eyes, his gaze unwavering. The balance of power had just shifted. I was wondering, he said, his voice smooth, unreadable, how long you were planning to keep this up. The street fell into a thick, suffocating silence. Grant's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the dozens of small details he had overlooked. The quiet confidence, the calculated patience, the fact that this man had never once looked afraid. Miller exhaled sharply through his nose. That, he gestured vaguely at the badge. That could be fake. Bennett lifted a brow. Would you like to test that theory? Grant was already a step ahead, fumbling for the radio at his shoulder. His voice, which had dripped with arrogance just moments before, now held the unmistakable edge of panic. Dispatch, he said, clearing his throat. We need a confirmation on an ID. Miller's jaw clenched. You should have said something sooner. Bennett exhaled a short laugh, cold, humorless. And miss watching you dig your own grave? A sharp inhale from Grant, a flicker of movement from Miller. Across the street, the woman had her phone out now, recording. And just like that, their entire world had begun to crumble. The badge sat there, glinting under the afternoon light like a silent executioner. It was small, unassuming, but it carried a weight heavier than the baton Grant had slammed against the car. For the first time, both officers hesitated. Their arrogance, once so absolute, cracked like thin ice beneath their boots. Bennett didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed, his face unreadable. He had seen this before, the moment when men like these realized they had made a mistake so monumental that there was no way to undo it. Grant cleared his throat, fingers still resting on his radio. This could still be a misunderstanding, he muttered, as if trying to convince himself. Bennett tilted his head slightly. A misunderstanding? His voice was calm, measured. You illegally detained me. You damaged my vehicle. You accused me of crimes without cause. And now that you see this, he gestured toward the badge, you suddenly want to talk about misunderstandings? Miller shifted uneasily, his bravado faltering. Look, let's just... He stopped himself, exhaling sharply through his nose. His fingers curled into fists before relaxing again. We can sort this out. Bennett's gaze didn't waver. Oh, I have no doubt it'll be sorted out. Grant took a step back, his mind clearly racing. He wasn't used to this. He was used to control, to barking orders and watching people scramble. But now, control had slipped through his fingers like sand, and he was the one scrambling. Across the street, the woman with the phone was still recording, her camera steady. More people had stopped now, pedestrians, a cyclist, even a man leaning against a lamppost, watching with cautious curiosity. The air around them had changed. It wasn't just a routine stop anymore. It was a scene. Grant's breath came out in short, clipped exhales. His pulse hammered in his throat. This was getting out of hand. He needed to regain control. Sir, he started, forcing his voice into something more polite, more reasonable. Let's take a step back here. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Bennett let the words hang between them. He could see it now, the gears turning behind Grant's eyes, desperately searching for a way out, a way to rewrite this moment before it spiraled into something he couldn't contain. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Bennett took a deliberate step forward, closing the space between them just enough for the power dynamic to shift once more. He wasn't just a man standing in front of them anymore. He was a presence. I have spent my career, Bennett said, his voice cool and razor-sharp, listening to men like you justify your actions after the fact, in courtrooms, in legal reports, in public apologies crafted by department PR teams, always the same words. We got off on the wrong foot. We can sort this out. His eyes locked onto Grant's, unblinking. Tell me, officer, when exactly were you planning to sort this out? Before or after you wrecked my car? Before or after you assumed I was a criminal?" Grant's mouth opened, then shut again. Miller took a half-step back, but his jaw was clenched tight, his pride warring with the undeniable fact that they had lost. Bennett didn't look away. He let the silence stretch, let them feel the weight of it. Then calmly, he reached for his phone and dialed. Grant's breath hitched. "Who are you calling?" Bennett didn't answer. He brought the phone to his ear, waiting. The call connected in 2 rings. "Judge Bennett," a voice answered, professional and alert. Grant and Miller both stiffened at the way the name was spoken, with recognition, with respect. Bennett's gaze never left theirs. "I need a federal attorney on site," he said smoothly. "Right now." Miller sucked in a sharp breath. "Wait a second." Bennett held up a finger, silencing him effortlessly. "And I want Internal Affairs notified." He glanced at his car, at the fresh dent on the door. "There's a matter of misconduct that needs to be addressed." Grant took a shaky step forward. "Look, sir, I think—" Bennett's eyes cut to him, sharp and precise. "Don't call me sir now. You had no problem calling me Malcolm 5 minutes ago." Grant's face paled. The shift was complete. The weight of what was happening had fully crashed over them. This wasn't going to be brushed under the rug. This wasn't going to disappear with a slap on the wrist. This was going to end their careers. A hush settled over the crowd that had gathered. Whispers passed between onlookers, murmured fragments of conversation caught in the air. "Did you hear that? He's a judge. They messed up bad." The woman filming took a step closer, angling her phone. The tension in the air had solidified, thick and inescapable. Bennett ended the call with a quiet click. He slid the phone back into his pocket and crossed his arms. "Now," he said, his voice deceptively mild, "I suggest you both stay exactly where you are." A muscle twitched in Miller's jaw. "You—" His hands clenched at his sides. "You don't have to do this." Bennett raised a brow. "Do what?" Grant let out a shuddering breath. "Ruin us." Bennett's expression didn't change. "I'm not ruining you," he said simply. "You did that yourselves." At that moment, the distant sound of approaching sirens cut through the silence. And this time, they weren't coming for him. The sirens grew louder, slicing through the thick silence that had settled over the street. Grant and Miller stood frozen, their once confident stances now stiff with the weight of impending consequences. The arrogance was gone, stripped away in mere minutes, leaving behind only the raw, unfiltered reality of their mistake. Bennett didn't move. He simply stood there, arms crossed, watching as their world unraveled. A black SUV pulled up first, its tinted windows reflecting the setting sun. The vehicle barely had time to stop before a man in a dark suit stepped out, his movements brisk, precise. His badge gleamed at his belt, a federal agent, and not just any agent. Internal Affairs. Behind him, 2 marked police cruisers pulled up, red and blue lights flashing across the faces of the gathered crowd. The officers who stepped out weren't like Grant and Miller. Their uniforms were crisp, their postures controlled, and they weren't here for Bennett. Grant shifted uneasily. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his bravado replaced by something raw, something dangerously close to fear. Miller took half a step toward Bennett, his voice low, desperate. "Look, this is getting out of hand. He stopped himself, inhaling sharply. "We made a mistake, all right? But you—" His gaze flicked to the approaching agents. "You don't have to do this." Bennett tilted his head slightly. "Do what?" Miller's jaw clenched. "You know what I mean." Bennett let the words linger in the air, his expression unreadable. Then, In a voice so calm it sent a chill down their spines, he said, "I warned you." The agent in the dark suit reached them first, his eyes flicking over the scene before settling on Bennett. "Judge Bennett," he greeted, his voice professional, controlled. Bennett nodded in acknowledgement. "Agent Crawford." The exchange was brief, but its meaning was clear. This wasn't a man they could intimidate. This was a man who had power they could never touch. Crawford turned to the two officers, his expression unreadable. "These the ones." Bennett didn't need to answer. The evidence was all around them. The damaged car, the badge still glinting on the hood, the silent, guilty faces of two men who had played a game they never expected to lose. Grant exhaled sharply, taking a step back as if the movement could undo everything. His voice wavered when he spoke. This doesn't have to go this way. We can talk about this." Crawford's lips twitched into something that might have been amusement if the situation weren't so severe. "Oh, you'll have plenty of time to talk." He gestured to the uniformed officers. "Cuff them." The words landed like a hammer. Miller's face drained of color. "Wait." Grant's hands shot up. "Hold on. We didn't—" The officers moved efficiently, pulling their arms behind their backs, locking the cold metal of the handcuffs around their wrists. The crowd stirred. A murmur rippled through the bystanders, a mix of shock, vindication, and something dangerously close to satisfaction. Grant turned his head, desperation creeping into his voice now. "This is insane. We're cops." Bennett's gaze met his, unwavering. "No," he said quietly. "You're criminals in uniform." Miller let out a sharp breath through his nose, his nostrils flaring. "You think this makes you better than us?" Bennett didn't so much as blink. "I don't have to think it." The officers pulled them toward the waiting patrol cars. Grant struggled for words, something, anything, to justify, to explain, to escape. But there was nothing left to say. The doors shut behind them with a dull thud, locking them inside their own reckoning. Bennett exhaled slowly, running a hand over the dent in his car before turning back to Crawford. "I assume this will be handled properly." Crawford nodded. "We'll make sure they get the justice they so clearly believe in." Bennett allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "Good." He stepped away from the chaos, from the flashing lights and murmuring crowd. He didn't look back. There was no need. Justice had already been served. The doors of the patrol car slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the now silent street. Inside, Grant and Miller sat rigid, their faces pale, their hands still locked in cold steel. The reality of their situation was sinking in fast. Too fast. The power they had wielded so carelessly was gone, stripped away in mere minutes. Bennett stood still for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the polished surface of his car, illuminating the dented door. The last, physical reminder of their arrogance. Across the street, the woman who had been recording lowered her phone slightly, her expression unreadable. Others in the crowd exchanged hushed words, some nodding in approval, others simply watching, stunned at what they had just witnessed. This wasn't how these stories usually ended. One of the uniformed officers approached Bennett, his posture stiff with the weight of knowing this never should have happened. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "we'll make sure this is handled appropriately." Bennett's expression remained unreadable. "I expect nothing less." The officer hesitated, then nodded before turning back to his colleagues. The situation was now out of his hands. Bennett let out a slow breath, running a hand over the dent in his car, tracing the damage left behind. It didn't matter. The dent could be fixed. The lesson, however, would remain. With one last glance at the patrol car, at the two men inside who now knew exactly what it felt like to be powerless, Bennett turned, stepping into his own vehicle. As he shut the door, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. Calm, unshaken, untouchable. Then, without a second look, he started the engine and drove away. He had work to do. The city lights flickered in the distance as Bennett drove, the hum of the engine steady beneath his fingers. The tension of the last hour had already faded, not because it wasn't significant, but because this was nothing new. For men like Grant and Miller, power had always been a weapon, something to wield over those they assumed had none. But tonight, for once, they had learned what it felt like to be on the other side. And justice had spoken. At a red light, Bennett glanced at his rearview mirror, his own eyes staring back at him. He thought of the countless others who wouldn't have had a badge to protect them, who wouldn't have had an audience to witness the truth. How many others had sat in his place, powerless? As the light turned green, he exhaled, gripping the wheel just a little tighter. One small victory didn't change the system, but it sent a message. Power wasn't in a uniform, it wasn't in a badge, it was in the truth. He pressed the gas pedal, the city unfolding before him. This fight wasn't over. What do you think? Was justice truly served? Have you ever witnessed a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More stories like this need to be told.